Hey guys, tonight we begin with a little trip back to ancient Greece. Because why not drift off imagining toga parties under the fading light of a Mediterranean sunset? Settle in, dim the lights, maybe grab a cup of something warm, and let's wander slowly through the streets of Athens, where the philosophers lounged, the merchants grumbled, and the elites, well, they mostly argued about who was the most cultured while secretly eating too much cheese. It's easy to romanticize ancient Greece, isn't it? Statues, olive trees, epic poetry, but the reality was a little less glamorous. Imagine dusty streets, the occasional donkey getting stuck in the marketplace, and citizens constantly trying to outdo each other in rhetorical one-upmanship. The sun would dip low, casting a golden glow over white marble buildings that were probably a bit chipped and dusty because, surprise, they didn't have modern cleaning tools. In this twilight, the elite families of Athens might have been finishing up dinner, which usually consisted of bread, some olives, maybe a fish if fortune smiled upon them, and the generous helping of gossip. And yes, even in ancient Greece, gossip was the true social currency. You could lose a reputation just by mispronouncing a word in public, or showing up at the symposium wearing slightly wrinkled robes. Speaking of symposia, these were the nightly gatherings where men of leisure got together to drink diluted wine, debate philosophy, and demonstrate just how far you could take sarcasm before it was socially unacceptable. Picture this, a group of toga-clad gentlemen reclining on couches, arguing whether virtue was worth cultivating if nobody was watching. And of course, someone always found a way to twist the argument into an insult about someone else's haircut. Very low-key drama, but enough to fill a few evenings. Meanwhile, the children of these families were winding down from their day of memorizing Homer and practicing choral songs. Yes, ancient Greek education was as much about culture as it was about showing off your ability to recite long, epic poetry in public without fainting. And no, they didn't have cheat sheets. You forgot the Iliad? Good luck explaining that to your tutor without sweating like a hero who just fought a minor battle against his own memory. Let's float over to the artisans and craftsmen who were wrapping up their work as dusk settled in. Pottery shops closed, revealing jars and amphora decorated with scenes of heroes, gods, and occasionally men who really looked like they had eaten too many figs. And the blacksmiths, forging bronze and iron, paused to wipe their brows, maybe sneaking a sip of watered-down wine. Because, let's be honest, even in ancient Greece, a little liquid courage helped with the monotony of metal smashing. At the same time, there were the poets, the wandering philosophers, and the occasional eccentric noble who had decided that walking around reciting random epigrams was the peak of sophistication. Imagine an evening stroll down a cobbled street with the philosopher muttering about the futility of desire, a baker's son chasing a stray chicken, and the scent of olive oil lingering in the air. Very calming, very sleepy, very perfect for bedtime historical immersion. And of course, we can't forget the domestic quirks of these households. Wealthy Greeks adored their pets, mostly dogs and cats, but also the occasional exotic bird. One can only assume that some pets were spoiled beyond reason, which is always comforting to imagine before nodding off, because at least some things never change. The children probably argued over whose bird sang the prettiest, while the parents quietly hoped nobody spilled olive oil on the mosaic floor. As the darkness creeped further, torches were lit. The soft flicker illuminated the intricate patterns on walls, the glint of bronze tools, and the occasional look of existential despair on the faces of poets who realized that the gods apparently were not that impressed with their latest ode. But no one panicked. This was Greece, after all, the land of measured contemplation, careful debate, and, on occasion, public humiliation disguised as education. And yet, even in this calm, routine setting, life had its little tragic comic twists. Families quarreled over inheritance, philosophers argued endlessly without resolution, and someone, somewhere, probably spilled olive oil on an important document and had to start all over again. But as the night deepened, the city seemed to exhale. Dogs curled up in corners, children yawned after one last recitation of a favorite poem, and the gentle hum of conversation faded into the cool night air. So as we drift along these ancient streets, let's pause to appreciate the quiet chaos that was daily life in classical Greece. No grand battles tonight, no dramatic coups, just the soft, almost sleepy rhythm of human lives entwined with history, philosophy, and a mild obsession with looking cultured while eating figs. It's not glamorous, but it's relatable in a very maybe I could survive in a toga kind of way. And with that, let's linger here a little longer, letting the sounds of the marketplace fade in our imagination, the echoes of distant conversation wrapping around us like a soft, historical blanket. Tomorrow, or, well, in the next part, we'll peek at some individual figures whose lives, though rooted in this everyday world, somehow managed to be both hilariously tragic and mildly terrifying. Because history, as it turns out, loves a good bedtime story just as much as we do. All right, so now that we've wandered through the streets of Athens at dusk, let's drift a little closer to the people who made ancient Greece, well, ancient Greece. And by that, I mean the philosophers, poets, and generally eccentric elites who somehow convinced everyone else that spending hours debating whether virtue was measurable was a productive use of time. Spoiler, it probably wasn't. Take Socrates, for instance, a man famous for walking around barefoot in all weather, asking uncomfortable questions, and developing a knack for making people feel profoundly inadequate in front of strangers. Imagine the scene: the sun dipping low, the marketplace quieting down, and there's Socrates, wandering around, asking a baker whether the bread is truly just, and probably getting shouted at because bakers are busy and philosophical musings are, well, kind of annoying if all you want is a loaf. Socrates didn't seem to care, of course. He had a reputation for, let's say, a deliberate disregard for social norms. You could almost hear him thinking, why wear shoes when you can contemplate the nature of justice barefoot? And while his lifestyle may seem slightly chaotic, or even mildly smelly by modern standards, his relentless curiosity made him unforgettable. For bedtime purposes, think of him as a wandering, irritatingly insightful uncle who shows up uninvited, but somehow leaves you feeling. So, now that we've wandered the streets and peeked into daily life, let's float over to some individuals who made ancient Greece feel both oddly relatable and quietly absurd. You know, the people who remind you that no matter how old the civilization, human eccentricity is timeless. First up, Diogenes of Sinope. Ah, yes, Diogenes, the philosopher who apparently decided that living in a large ceramic jar was a perfectly acceptable lifestyle choice. Not exactly the sort of home you'd see in a modern interior design magazine, but he seemed content enough. Imagine him lounging in his jar as the sun sets, observing passers-by with a critical eye and muttering philosophical criticisms of their life choices. And he didn't just stop at living unconventionally. He carried a lantern during the day, claiming he was searching for an honest man. People mostly thought he was a little crazy, but in the calm, sleepy way, it's kind of charming. You can picture him gently shaking his head at the noise of the marketplace, utterly unconcerned with what anyone else thought. Then there's Alcibiades, the Athenian politician in general, who was simultaneously brilliant, flamboyant, and somehow always the center of mild scandal. His life reads like a never-ending bedtime drama, brilliant speeches, extravagant parties, and constant betrayals, because why not double down? One moment, he's admired for his strategic genius. The next, he's exiled for causing offense. And yet, he returned again and again, like a cat who refuses to be ignored. Picture him at dusk, perhaps rehearsing a speech in a courtyard, hair perfectly coiffed, plotting political maneuvers while everyone else quietly finishes their olives. The drama is there, yes, but it's the slow, inevitable kind, the sort you can let drift through your mind as you sip warm tea and relax. And we must not forget Sappho, whose poetry often centered on personal longing, friendship, and love, all rendered in lines that are now both famous and fragmentary. Her life is a mix of gentle tragedy and quiet inspiration. Imagine her evenings spent by candlelight, composing verses while the Aegean breeze carries the scent of distant flowers. Unlike some of the loud, chaotic philosophers, she worked in a soft, intimate sphere. Her poetry reminds us that even in a world dominated by grand politics and philosophical debates, there was room for reflection, personal expression, and a little quiet melancholy, perfect for easing the mind as night falls. Now that we've floated gently through classical Greece, it's time to drift into the Hellenistic period. This is when Alexander the Great's conquests spread Greek culture across the Mediterranean and Near East, and suddenly everyone with a crown was somehow related to everyone else, or at least thought they were. Evening settles over these dynasties like a soft blanket, though underneath that blanket, well, family life was slightly complicated. Take the Ptolemies of Egypt, for instance, famous for their love of inbreeding, because why not double down on family genetics when you can? Marriages between siblings were the norm, creating a dynasty that could be described as genetically adventurous in the mildest, most awkward way possible. Cleopatra VII, the last of the line, inherited both the brilliance and occasional physical quirks of generations past. Imagine a quiet evening in Alexandria, torches flicker in palace corridors, the scent of papyrus mingles with incense, and someone somewhere is quietly calculating which cousin to marry next. It's domesticity with a twist of mild horror, perfect for bedtime reflection. Meanwhile, in Macedonia, Alexander's successors, known as the Diadochi, spent their evenings negotiating, scheming, and occasionally discovering that a friendly ally could turn into a not-so-friendly enemy overnight. But in the calm of twilight, there was also the quieter side of their lives. Dinners by lamplight, tutors hovering over children, and servants tidying the palace. The high stakes of empires soften just a little when you imagine a young prince being scolded for dropping a cup of wine or forgetting his scrolls. It's oddly humanizing, like peeking at the history behind the grandeur. Then there's Seleucus I, founder of the Seleucid Empire. His life involved moving across vast territories, establishing cities, and occasionally getting frustrated when his generals ignored instructions. Yet, even he had evenings of quiet routine, reviewing correspondence, checking supplies, and perhaps taking a rare moment to watch the sunset over a river or desert. It's the kind of gentle contrast that makes history feel soft, public ambition paired with private stillness. And of course, life in these courts wasn't all political maneuvering. Family dynamics were surprisingly relatable. Children learned from tutors, practiced music, and sometimes staged minor rebellions like refusing to wear the ceremonial robes for a festival or hiding scrolls to get attention. Parents sighed, courtiers whispered, and the cycle repeated. These small dramas are perfect for slow, sleepy storytelling. Not shocking, not gruesome, just quietly human. The palaces themselves deserve a brief mention. They were enormous, echoing with footsteps filled with art, tapestries, and bronze furnishings, but also slightly drafty, noisy, and prone to minor accidents. Someone would always trip over a rug, a lamp might topple, and servants hustled silently to fix things before anyone noticed. These little imperfections make the grandeur feel cozy rather than intimidating, like observing history from a gentle distance. Meanwhile, Greek culture continued to diffuse across these territories. Philosophers, poets, and scientists traveled to new cities, establishing schools, gardens, and libraries. Imagine an evening stroll through Pergamon or Antioch, lamplight illuminating mosaics, the faint sound of a lyre from a nearby courtyard, and scholars quietly debating over cups of wine. The intellectual energy of the Hellenistic world is mesmerizing, but also surprisingly calming when you picture it in these gentle twilight moments. Let's not forget the minor royals and nobles whose lives often slipped quietly into historical footnotes. Some were obsessed with astrology, others with their gardens, and a few with perfecting the daily schedule of servants. One can imagine a princess standing on a balcony, checking that the fountains flow evenly, while tutors hover nearby, reciting poetry or recounting philosophy. The stakes might be high in the broader political sense, but the evening scene feels domestic, orderly, and perfect for a sleepy meditation on history. And of course, the occasional eccentric persists. There were kings who insisted on daily rituals involving precise arrangements of fruit, queens who collected exotic animals, and courtiers who took their ceremonial robes just a little too seriously. These quirks are not shocking, they're gentle reminders that even the powerful share the same idiosyncrasies we do: routines, obsessions, and a love of small, controlled order. The cities themselves also had their own calming rhythm. Markets emptied slowly, lamps were lit in narrow streets, and the soft chatter of scholars, merchants, and servants lingered in the evening air. Music from private lessons drifted faintly through windows. Dogs padded quietly over stone floors, and children practiced recitations under watchful eyes. It's domestic life on a grand scale, soothing and oddly comforting, especially when contrasted with the political drama happening just out of sight. And finally, as night deepens over these Hellenistic kingdoms, imagine the palaces quieting. Torches burn low, servants pause to take brief rest, and young royals drift toward sleep, perhaps dreaming of far-off cities, distant conquests, or simply a perfect tomorrow. Life continues, full of ambition and human foibles, but softened in the calm of evening. It's in these moments, the small, gentle rhythms of daily existence, that we can most easily connect with the past. So as we let the Hellenistic world settle in the dim light, imagine drifting alongside its people: minor royals, philosophers, eccentric courtiers, and domestic servants alike. They all contribute to a slow, enduring rhythm of life that's mildly absurd, a little tragic, but quietly reassuring in its humanity. Continuing gently from our Hellenistic wanderings, let's zoom in on some of the rulers whose lives were equal parts ambition, domestic quirks, and small tragedies. Because let's be honest, the grand sweep of history is easier to digest when viewed through the lens of oddly relatable personal habits. Take Ptolemy II Philadelphus, for instance. He ruled Egypt after Alexander's death and somehow convinced himself that everything in his palace needed to be perfectly symmetrical. We're talking columns, gardens, even the placement of his prized animals. Imagine walking through the palace at dusk. The fountains sparkle in perfect alignment, the bronze statues glint in the fading sun, and Ptolemy is muttering about the imperfect angle of the topiary. For bedtime purposes, it's oddly soothing. Someone, somewhere, just cares about symmetry, while the rest of the world drifts toward chaos. Then there's Arsinoe II, his sister, and also his wife, which, yes, is a bit eyebrow-raising even for us. But hey, Hellenistic dynasties love to double down on family loyalty. Genetics be damned. Arsinoe had flair for the dramatic, though mostly subtle, evening-level drama, like rearranging palace rituals or quietly supervising which guests were allowed to enter the inner courts. She could be both charming and strategically ruthless, but always in a manner that's more gently fascinating than terrifying. Picture her at dusk, a faint smile, planning alliances as easily as she adjusts the folds of her robes. Moving north to Macedonia, let's consider Cassander, one of Alexander's former generals. By nightfall, he often oversaw palace affairs, carefully tracking family alliances and plotting minor punishments for perceived slights. He wasn't violent in a theatrical sense. Rather, he managed tiny, quiet intrigues that would ripple across his kingdom. For example, a tutor might be reassigned for failing to instill proper manners, or a young prince gently corrected for poor choice of words in front of guests. Subtle, domestic power plays, almost calming when you imagine them from the gentle distance of our bedtime perspective. Seleucus I, whom we met before, also had his personal rituals. He was an organizer by nature, checking inventory lists, mapping his territories, and occasionally sighing over the imperfections of distant governors. One could imagine him at twilight, sipping watered wine, quietly contemplating whether the northern provinces are managing their grain supply adequately while lanterns flicker around him and servants adjust scrolls for neatness. The scene is oddly meditative. Empire-scale responsibilities softened by evening quiet and a minor obsession with organization. And then, of course, there are the tragic quirks of youth in these families. Young princes and princesses practiced speeches, memorized poetry, and were often reminded, politely but persistently, of the weight of their future roles. One can imagine a young royal staring out a palace window as the last light fades, trying not to spill wine on his robes while a tutor hovers nearby with a scroll. The stakes were high, certainly, but the evening itself carries a calm rhythm that makes these small pressures feel strangely relatable. Meanwhile, minor nobles often pursued eccentric hobbies to pass the time. Some collected exotic animals, others crafted intricate jewelry, and a few obsessed over the perfect shape of a ceramic cup. These tiny preoccupations are like whispers from the past, gentle reminders that human fascination with small details transcends time. You can picture an evening where the palace seems quiet, the major political events paused, and someone carefully measures the angle of a garden fountain, utterly absorbed in their own little world. Even the domestic servants had their gentle rituals, preparing evening meals, tidying lamps, and making sure pets were fed, all while navigating the quiet tension of elite households. There's comfort in imagining their steady routines providing a soft counterpoint to the ambitions and eccentricities of the royals. Life moved quietly forward, punctuated by minor disputes, subtle jokes, and occasional small triumphs. A perfectly cooked fish, a scroll arranged just so, a torch lighting without incident. And of course, the Hellenistic world continued to support scholars, artists, and philosophers. Even at dusk, you might hear the faint strumming of a lyre, the quiet whisper of a tutor guiding a student, or the soft recitation of poetry. These sounds float through palaces and city streets alike, blending with the flickering torchlight to create a soothing, almost hypnotic evening ambiance. So as the night deepens, imagine these rulers and nobles winding down. Symmetrical gardens, faint incense, children practicing, and servants moving quietly through corridors. It's a gentle, almost hypnotic tableau of ambition, eccentricity, and domesticity, intertwined in a calm rhythm that persists despite the occasional minor disaster. Even the most powerful and slightly odd members of Hellenistic dynasties shared the universal human experience of evening quiet, small routines, and the gentle unfolding of life. And as we pause here, consider the subtle charm of these quiet intrigues, evening reflections, and eccentric routines. They remind us that history isn't always loud or dramatic. It can be soft, strangely amusing, and oddly comforting. As evening deepens over the Hellenistic kingdoms, let's drift into the slightly softer, more intimate side of royal life. Love, personal quirks, and small, gently tragic moments. Because even rulers with their empires and grand ambitions had private lives that were strangely relatable. if slightly absurd. Take Cleopatra II of Egypt, for example. She was caught in that delicate balance of political marriage and personal preference. A queen who had to navigate family loyalty, public expectation, and the occasional marital quarrel. In the calm of her private chambers at dusk, one can imagine her sipping wine, glancing at scrolls of strategy, and thinking, well, this empire isn't going to manage itself, but at least the figs are sweet tonight. It's a small, humanizing moment amid dynastic drama, perfect for a slow, gentle narrative. And then there's Antiochus IV of the Seleucid Empire, a king with an obsession for appearances. He reportedly cared deeply about his clothing, personal grooming, and public image. One evening, he might have paused mid-meal to adjust a cloak or comb his hair before a minor family audience. From a modern perspective, it's mildly amusing, but also a reminder that even absolute power doesn't erase the quirks of human vanity. Imagine lanterns flickering against polished bronze while he fusses over the symmetry of his hair, completely absorbed, oblivious to the quiet chaos of palace servants moving silently around him. Romance in these dynasties often added another layer of subtle intrigue. Marriages were political, of course, but sometimes feelings got involved in unexpected ways. Ptolemy VIII, nicknamed Euergetes II, or Benefactor, because royal nicknames were often ironic, had a famously turbulent love life. Evening meetings in candlelit halls could involve whispered arguments about succession, subtle displays of affection, and a dash of sibling rivalry. Nothing gruesome, just a delicate human mess. For bedtime purposes, picture the scene as quietly amusing rather than scandalous. Lovers whisper, advisors take notes, and the palace hums with a gentle tension. Meanwhile, young heirs practiced diplomacy and etiquette under the soft glow of lamps. Tutors reminded them of proper gestures, noblewomen oversaw training in music and dance, and minor courtiers quietly observed. It's a scene of small, persistent effort. Children learning their roles, servants gliding through halls, and rulers subtly shaping future generations. The stakes are high in theory, but the evening itself is calm and meditative. Eccentricity persisted in private hobbies. Some royals collected rare objects, others developed unusual daily routines, like precisely timed baths, repeated meditations, or daily walks along palace terraces. Ptolemy VI reportedly enjoyed long walks in gardens while discussing philosophy with favorite advisors. The night air, soft and fragrant, carried the quiet murmur of conversation and the occasional distant laughter from servants. These subtle routines add texture to historical life, gentle glimpses into human habits across millennia. Minor tragedies, too, existed quietly. Children fell ill, inheritances sparked whispered tensions, and small mistakes, a dropped goblet or a misspoken line during a ceremony, sometimes left lasting impressions. But these events weren't sensationalized. They were part of the ongoing rhythm of life, softly unfolding in candlelit rooms and shadowed corridors. It's the kind of human drama that doesn't startle, but gently engages the mind, perfect for slow, historical contemplation. And, as always, pets played their understated role. Kings and queens alike kept dogs, cats, and occasionally exotic animals. Imagine a small dog padding quietly through a palace hall, sniffing at slippers, or a parrot repeating fragments of overheard conversations. These gentle, domestic touches remind us that even the most ambitious rulers shared small, comforting rituals with their animals, softening the intensity of dynastic life. Meanwhile, scholars and philosophers continued to drift through these courts. Evening discussions might involve mathematics, astronomy, or gentle debate over poetry. Perhaps a tutor recited lines from Homer, while the young royal practiced gestures of proper recitation. The flickering lamplight, the faint shuffle of servants, and the murmur of quiet conversation all contribute to a rhythm that's slow, soft, and oddly soothing. And so, as twilight stretches into night, we see these Hellenistic royals not just as historical figures, but as people. Eccentric, vain, ambitious, occasionally tragic, and quietly human. Their lives are full of small routines, minor domestic traumas, and subtle pleasures, the perfect kind of history to drift off to. Finally, imagine a calm palace terrace at the edge of Alexandria or Antioch. Torches flicker, fountains gurgle softly, dogs curl in corners, and candlelight glows across bronze statues. Royals check their papers, children practice poetry, and the night slowly unfolds. It's a tableau of gentle intrigue, minor eccentricity, and quiet domesticity, a perfect historical lullaby. As we continue our slow stroll through the late Hellenistic world, let's linger on the quieter corners of royal life, the minor royals, eccentric advisors, and daily routines that gave structure to palace life. Because while kings and queens often dominate history books, it's in these smaller, subtler dramas that life really hums along. Consider the younger siblings of reigning monarchs. Often overlooked in major political histories, these princes and princesses lived lives full of gentle intrigue, small jealousies, and endless tutoring. They practiced etiquette, memorized poetry, and sometimes staged subtle rebellions, refusing to wear ceremonial robes or misplacing scrolls, just enough to elicit a sigh from a tutor or a raised eyebrow from a parent. Evening for them was a delicate balance between quiet mischief and dutiful practice, all under the soft glow of flickering lamps. Eccentric advisors also populated these courts. Some were obsessed with astrology, carefully charting the stars to predict minor events like the best time to water a garden or schedule a meeting. Others took meticulous notes on family behaviors, recording what the young prince said, how the queen adjusted her hair, and whether servants were particularly efficient. One can imagine a quiet hall at dusk, and advisors scribbling furiously by candlelight while everyone else moves calmly around them, blissfully unaware of the meticulous records being kept. And then there were the tutors and scholars who carried their own minor eccentricities. Some insisted on strict recitation schedules, others on precise posture, and a few on drinking an oddly exact amount of diluted wine before beginning lessons. They wandered palace corridors in soft sandals, discussing philosophy, astronomy, or geometry in hushed tones. The soft hum of their voices mingled with distant music, the shuffle of servants, and the occasional clink of a goblet, creating a rhythm that is calming, almost hypnotic, and perfect for bedtime reflection. Meanwhile, domestic routines quietly persisted. Servants prepared simple evening meals, tended to animals, and polished lamps. Dogs padded silently over marble floors, cats slinked along corridors, and exotic birds occasionally added their own small musical notes to the evening. It's a tableau of minor movements and quiet attentions, softening the grandeur of palace life and making even the most ambitious rulers seem more human. Minor royals often indulged in small personal hobbies. Some collected rare shells, others practiced music, and a few were devoted to quiet walks through palace gardens. One princess might trace patterns in the fountain water while discussing poetry with the tutor, or a young prince inspected the alignment of statues, making careful mental notes. It's subtle domestic drama, almost meditative, an endless sequence of small gestures that quietly shape life in the Hellenistic courts. Romantic entanglements continued in understated ways. Courtiers whispered about minor affections, arranged matches, or teased young nobles about who might be secretly in love. Nothing scandalous for our bedtime purposes, just gentle, humanized glimpses of relationships developing alongside more serious dynastic duties. Imagine a candlelit corridor where a young noble glances nervously at a tutor or cousin, quietly rehearsing manners and words while the night hums softly around them. Evenings often ended with soft music or poetry recitation. Lyres strummed gently in quiet rooms, scholars read passages aloud, and children repeated lines softly, striving for precision. There's comfort in these repeated, low-stakes rituals, a slow rhythm that provides continuity amid political tension and familial eccentricities. For anyone imagining these scenes while winding down, it's a gentle, lulling cadence. And of course, small tragedies punctuated the calm. Children fell ill, minor missteps in etiquette drove soft scolding, or a favorite pet wandered off only to be found hours later. These minor inconveniences are gentle reminders that life, even in the gilded palaces of Hellenistic kingdoms, was imperfect and human. They add texture without alarm, and they allow us to imagine historical figures as individuals who experience the same small challenges that still exist today. As night deepens, the palace itself seems to sigh with quiet satisfaction. Torches flicker in corridors, fountains gurgle softly, and servants tidy spaces in preparation for tomorrow. Young royals drift to sleep, tutors close scrolls, and minor advisors pause in contemplation. The rhythm of life in these kingdoms is unhurried, soft, and strangely reassuring. As we drift further into the twilight of the Hellenistic world, it's worth lingering on the small, oddly charming routines that filled the lives of royals, minor courtiers, and their households. Because while grand battles and political machinations dominate textbooks, the quieter, more eccentric habits of individuals often give history its soft, human rhythm. Consider the hobbies of minor royals. Some were obsessed with collecting small, seemingly trivial items, shells, coins, or exotic feathers brought from distant lands. Imagine a young prince crouched beside a fountain at dusk, carefully inspecting a new shell, while his tutor quietly observes, taking notes for posterity, or perhaps just muttering under his breath. There's no drama, no violence, just a gentle absorption in detail that seems both absurd and soothing in equal measure. And then there were the artistic pursuits. A princess might spend the evening painting small murals on walls or pottery, while another practiced singing or playing a lyre. Tutors would guide each stroke, softly correcting posture or pronunciation, and servants would quietly ensure that lamps were steady and wax didn't drip onto the artwork. The palace in these moments hums with a quiet energy, human creativity in miniature, layered with the soft murmurs of instruction and encouragement. Eccentric advisors continue to add their own flavor to palace life. Some spent entire evenings charting stars or consulting obscure text to determine auspicious times for minor events, such as planting gardens or arranging fountains. Imagine a small room lit by candlelight, scrolls rolled open, notes scribbled, and an advisor muttering quietly about celestial alignments that probably didn't matter at all. The scene is oddly comforting, a kind of meticulous absurdity that highlights human obsession with order in a chaotic world. Romantic and social subtleties persisted as well. Arranged marriages, whispered affections, and minor rivalries created a gentle undercurrent of tension. Young nobles practiced polite conversation, rehearsed gestures of etiquette, and occasionally stole quiet glances across candlelit halls. Nothing scandalous, just the kind of human interaction that softly punctuates daily life. Picture a princess adjusting her hair before dinner, a young prince straightening his cloak, and servants moving silently between rooms, maintaining order. It's the soft choreography of a palace settling into evening. Pets, of course, remained a constant source of quiet charm. Dogs padded across marble floors, cats curled on windowsills, and exotic birds occasionally added a note of melody. One can imagine a small dog gently tugging at a servant's robe, a cat batting at a ribbon, or a parrot repeating an overheard line from a tutor. These minor movements, while inconsequential in the grand sweep of history, add warmth and life to the scene, softening the otherwise precise routines of palace existence. Even the royals' personal habits could be oddly specific. Some kings insisted on baths at precisely timed intervals. Others preferred a certain order of incense, and a few counted steps as they walked along palace terraces. Ptolemy VI, for example, reportedly enjoyed long evening strolls while discussing philosophy or poetry with a favorite advisor. The quiet rhythm of footsteps, the murmur of conversation, and the soft rustle of robes create a gentle sensory tableau, perfect for a bedtime historical reverie. Minor mishaps continued to punctuate the calm. A dropped goblet, a misaligned scroll, or a child forgetting a line of poetry could lead to soft admonishments, subtle corrections, or quiet sighs. There's a mild humor in imagining these small incidents. The stakes feel human and relatable rather than sensationalized. Evening routines, domestic care, and personal quirks persist despite these tiny interruptions, creating a rhythm that's soothing in its predictability. And then there are the quiet joys: a perfectly arranged garden, the soft glow of oil lamps, the faint smell of incense or cooked figs, and the gentle rustle of evening breezes through open windows. Royals, tutors, servants, and advisors all move within this gentle sphere, participating in small, interconnected acts that sustain the rhythm of palace life. Even power, ambition, and dynastic tension seem softened under the calm cloak of evening. As night deepens over the Hellenistic kingdoms, let's linger on the soft, quietly amusing dramas of palace life. Because while historians often focus on battles, conquests, and political maneuvering, the smaller, gentler absurdities of courtly existence can be just as fascinating, if far more sleep-inducing. Take, for example, the subtle rivalries among courtiers. Imagine two advisors, both equally competent, subtly competing over the king's attention. One might spend hours arranging scrolls perfectly, while the other quietly observes how the monarch favors gestures over content. Perhaps a lamp is accidentally placed closer to one than the other, a minor, almost comically trivial incident, but it sparks a ripple of whispered commentary and suppressed sighs. For the modern observer, it's both mildly amusing and soothing. The stakes are low, the tension understated, and the human behavior timeless. Minor royals continued to practice daily routines with quiet diligence. Children rehearsed poetry, honed music skills, or practiced etiquette, sometimes under the mildly impatient gaze of a tutor. Evening meals involved gentle correction of posture, careful attention to the order of seating, and the faint hum of conversation on matters both important and trivial. A dropped piece of bread or a slightly misaligned napkin might earn a soft admonition, but nothing dramatic enough to disturb the slow rhythm of the household. Eccentric hobbies persisted in these quieter moments. A princess might spend hours arranging shells or flowers in precise patterns, while a prince meticulously aligned miniature sculptures. Some royals were fascinated by astrology, charting stars for hours or testing various types of ink for calligraphy. The court's seemingly endless supply of quiet, mildly obsessive activities creates a rhythm that's both oddly mesmerizing and gently humorous. For bedtime purposes, it's perfect. Humans worrying about trivial perfection and nothing more. Even meals had their own subtle dramas. Banquets were less about excess and more about careful presentation, polite conversation, and the occasional minor faux pas. Perhaps a noble mispronounced a poem's line or forgot the proper toast. Enough to generate quiet murmurs, but not enough for scandal. Meanwhile, servants moved with discreet precision, adjusting lamps, replacing spilled wine, or retrieving a dropped utensil. The result is a gentle tableau of domestic order, punctuated by small, harmless human imperfections. Pets continued to animate these quieter evenings. Dogs padded softly along corridors, cats slinked along windowsills, and birds occasionally squawked fragments of overheard poetry. One can picture a parrot repeating a line from a tutor, while a dog nudges a servant's foot in search of a treat. These minor touches of domestic life add warmth and charm to otherwise structured routines, softening the aura of palace authority and humanizing even the most ambitious royals. Courtly absurdities also persisted in subtler forms. Some nobles were obsessed with perfectly arranged gardens or the precise alignment of statues. Others conducted elaborate rituals, not for political gain, but for personal satisfaction. Carefully timed walks, measured baths, or specific seating arrangements for informal discussions. The end result is almost hypnotic, a palace moving in slow, coordinated rhythms, punctuated by eccentric personal quirks and minor absurdities. For bedtime purposes, it's perfect. Humans worrying about trivial perfection and nothing more. Romantic dynamics continued in understated ways. Arranged marriages, gentle rivalries, and minor flirtations occurred behind softly closed doors. A young prince might rehearse a line of poetry for a princess, while she quietly considers which flower to place in her hair. Nothing scandalous, nothing dramatic, just the subtle hum of interpersonal relations, moving at the unhurried pace of twilight. As we settle further into the late Hellenistic period, let's float through those quieter, almost forgettable moments of history. The kind of events that didn't make it into dramatic narratives, but shaped palace life and personal routines in ways both small and oddly fascinating. Evening in these kingdoms was often less about battles and more about the gentle interplay between personal quirks and daily obligations. Consider a minor treaty signed at dusk. Not a headline-grabbing alliance, but a soft, methodical negotiation between scribes, advisors, and young nobles observing proper etiquette. Parchments were carefully unrolled, wax seals inspected, and torches flickered across the faces of participants. No dramatic confrontation occurred. Instead, there was a slow, almost ceremonial precision that highlights the quiet rhythms of power. For bedtime purposes, imagine the hum of soft footsteps, murmured approvals, and the gentle scratch of quills against parchment. Eccentric rulers continued their personal habits, adding texture to these quiet evenings. Ptolemy VIII, for instance, was reportedly obsessed with counting steps during palace walks and ensuring fountains flowed in exact patterns. Imagine him pacing slowly, lantern in hand, while an advisor whispers about the stars or a servant quietly adjusts a misplaced goblet. These tiny quirks are oddly charming, especially when framed against the grandeur of empire, offering a glimpse of humanity behind ambition. Minor domestic mishaps also punctuated evenings. A servant might accidentally knock over a scroll, a young royal could misplace a piece of jewelry, or a dog might tug at the hem of a noble's robe. Each incident was small, easily remedied, and occasionally amusing. It's these gentle human imperfections that create the hypnotic rhythm of palace life, far more soothing than tales of conquest or rebellion. Romantic and interpersonal subtleties persisted quietly. Courtiers exchanged glances across halls, tutors reminded children of proper gestures, and minor nobles whispered about the latest poetic recitation or musical performance. Even in the absence of dramatic intrigue, these interactions contributed to the texture of daily life, forming a network of soft tension, observation, and occasional amusement. Imagine the faint shuffle of robes, the subtle adjustments of hair, and the whispered correction of a line of verse. Hobbies continue to occupy both royals and advisors. Collecting rare objects, arranging gardens, or studying the stars at dusk provided small, absorbing rituals. Some royals practiced music, others composed poetry or sketches, and a few devoted hours to observing palace animals. The scene is slow and deliberate. Candlelight glimmers on bronze, water ripples gently in fountains, and the faint hum of conversation drifts through quiet corridors. It's calming, repetitive, and ideal for a gentle historical reverie. Even subtle historical events, like minor political disputes, were often domestic in scale. A disagreement over seating order, a mismanaged ceremony, or a slight misunderstanding among advisors could be remembered for weeks, treated with polite corrections and understated annoyance. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just human behavior unfolding in careful, measured rhythms. These small conflicts, resolved quietly by nightfall, add texture without disturbing the sleepy pace we're cultivating. And of course, pets continue their understated role. Dogs curled near fireplaces, cats prowled shadowed halls, and exotic birds occasionally repeated snippets of overheard poetry or conversation. Their presence softens the rigidity of palace life, reminding us that even the most ambitious rulers had companions whose concerns were delightfully mundane. A dog nudging a slipper, a cat swatting at a ribbon, or a parrot mimicking a tutor's lecture, all gentle, charming touches that quietly enliven the evening. And finally, consider the quiet joys that persisted amidst subtle chaos. The perfect alignment of statues in a garden, a lamp burning steadily without flicker, the faint aroma of olive oil or wine, or the soft rustle of robes across marble floors. These small moments provide a gentle, enduring rhythm, linking individuals across generations and imbuing history with a calm, almost hypnotic continuity. So, as night stretches over Alexandria, Antioch, or Pella, imagine the palace settling into a slow, measured rhythm. Minor royals rehearsing lines, tutors whispering corrections, advisors quietly noting observations, and pets weaving through the stillness. Life in these late Hellenistic courts, with all its quirks, small dramas, and understated routines, continues softly, leaving us with a soothing image of history that is deeply human and gently amusing. As we continue our slow drift through late Hellenistic courts, let's focus on those small, gently fascinating details. The personal quirks of rulers, minor tragedies that never made it into dramatic histories, and the quiet rhythms that defined palace life. Evening in these kingdoms was often a soft, intricate dance of domesticity, eccentricity, and subtle human foibles. Take Ptolemy IX Lathros, for instance. He had a reputation for being irritable and sometimes unpredictable, but mostly in small, domestic ways. Perhaps a tutor mispronounced a word, or a servant placed a scroll slightly off the table, and his expression would darken for a few minutes, then fade as quickly as it appeared. Minor irritations, fleeting yet memorable, perfectly suited to the soft ebb of evening routines. Imagine the flickering torchlight across polished floors as he sighs, adjusts his robe, and moves on. His family life was similarly understated in its drama. Marriages were politically strategic, children were carefully educated, and minor domestic disputes occasionally arose. Maybe a young prince refused to wear ceremonial attire correctly, or a princess misplaced a personal object. These incidents were quietly corrected, leaving small traces of mild tension rather than catastrophe. For bedtime purposes, these details are more charming than alarming. tiny, human moments amid historical grandeur. Eccentric hobbies persisted. Some rulers were meticulous about the alignment of palace gardens, fountains, and statues. Others obsessed over numbers, celestial patterns, or the precise color of robes for specific ceremonies. Picture a quiet corridor where a minor royal rearranges miniature sculptures for hours while an advisor whispers about auspicious timings and a servant subtly adjusts a lamp. These small, repetitive rituals imbue the evening with a rhythm and gentle absurdity, the perfect material for a slow, meditative historical journey. Pets, as always, softened the rigidities of court life. Dogs padded silently along corridors, cats perched on window ledges, and exotic birds occasionally squawked fragments of conversation. One can imagine a young prince or princess pausing to watch a cat bat at a ribbon or a dog nudging a slipper toward a servant. These minor, gentle distractions add warmth and humanity, creating the soft, living texture of palace life. Romantic subtleties continued in understated ways. Courtiers whispered in corridors, arranged matches quietly, and observed the polite gestures of affection between young royals. Nothing scandalous or dramatic, just faint ripples of human interaction, subtle and persistent, flowing through the calm rhythm of evening. A quiet glance, a gently rehearsed gesture, or a soft recitation of poetry creates the slow, hypnotic pulse of domestic life. Even minor misfortunes were handled quietly. Children might fall ill, a small argument could flare up and die down, or a servant might misplace an object temporarily. These events punctuate the day with minor tension but never disturb the overall calm. They remind us that even the most powerful dynasties were subject to the ordinary human ebb and flow of life. Meanwhile, tutors, advisors, and minor courtiers continued their quiet work. Lessons in poetry, music, and philosophy persisted under dim candlelight. Advisors reviewed correspondence, considered reports, or quietly advised rulers on minor matters. Servants moved efficiently through corridors, adjusting lamps, tidying objects, and occasionally stifling a quiet sigh or whispered comment. The palace hums with a soft, continuous rhythm punctuated by minor quirks and eccentricities, a slow-motion snapshot of life in Hellenistic courts. And finally, there is a subtle poetry in evening routines. Fountains ripple, lanterns flicker, music drifts softly from practice rooms, and shadows stretch across marble floors. Royals, minor courtiers, tutors, and servants alike participate in a rhythm that is oddly calming. Small gestures, soft attention to detail, and understated human behavior. These are the moments that historians rarely dwell on, yet they define the texture of life in these dynasties. Gentle, humorous, and quietly enduring. So as night settles fully over Alexandria, Antioch, or Pella, imagine the soft flicker of torches, the rustle of robes, the quiet scratch of a quill, and the gentle movement of pets. Life continues in minor dramas, eccentric rituals, and subtle human interactions. Slow, soft, and oddly reassuring. These quiet details are what make history not just informative, but strangely comforting to drift off to. As we glide deeper into the late-night hours of the Hellenistic courts, let's slow our pace and focus on the quiet, understated rhythms that give life to palace walls. By now, you've seen generals, minor royals, and advisors. But evening has a way of softening ambitions, highlighting quirks, and revealing the small, human details historians rarely dwell on. Consider a palace corridor illuminated by flickering torches. A minor royal practices lines of poetry, his tutor crouched nearby, whispering corrections in a calm monotone. Servants adjust lamps, ensuring shadows do not fall awkwardly across bronze statues. Somewhere, a cat pads silently along the hallway, tail flicking in mild curiosity. These small, seemingly insignificant movements create the gentle hum of late-night activity. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just the pulse of ordinary human life. Eccentric advisors often come to life at this hour. Some obsessively check lists of household items, others quietly record minor observations about family behavior or palace schedules. A scroll might be unrolled for hours, wax seals inspected, measurements verified. The soft scratch of quill on parchment, punctuated by a whispered observation or a stifled sigh, fills the corridors with an oddly soothing rhythm. Imagine a minor advisor mumbling, "Fountains are slightly off axis again," and the world moving calmly on around them. Meanwhile, minor royals have their own subtle routines. A young prince might practice the alignments of ceremonial robes, pacing a few steps back and forth, adjusting collars and cuffs, while a princess arranges flowers on her balcony in a precise pattern. These are tiny acts of control in a world of dynastic uncertainty, small rituals that bring comfort and rhythm. Evening provides space for these eccentricities to flourish, and the palace accommodates them without fanfare. Romantic subtleties persist quietly as well. Soft gestures, polite exchanges of poetry, or a glance exchanged across a room contribute to a gentle undercurrent of interpersonal drama. Courtiers whisper quietly, tutors coach gently, and minor nobles rehearse their gestures of decorum. No scandal, no shouting matches, just human beings navigating relationships with mild care and deliberate pacing. Pets remain a calming presence. Dogs curl near hearths, cats prowl corridors, and birds occasionally squawk fragments of overheard recitations. One can imagine a young princess pausing to scratch a cat behind the ears, or a small dog nudging a servant's hand for attention. These quiet interactions are small, comforting details that enrich the rhythm of palace life, softening routines with warmth and gentle amusement. Even minor mishaps are softened by the late hour. A dropped goblet, a misaligned scroll, or a slightly crooked lamp might provoke a faint sigh, a quiet correction, and then the world moves on. These tiny human imperfections create a gentle, reassuring cadence, reminding us that even the grandest dynasties were composed of ordinary, imperfect lives. Hobbies and personal obsessions continue quietly. Royals might sketch patterns on paper, adjust miniature sculptures, or meditate on the alignment of fountains and gardens. Tutors and advisors quietly support these pursuits, offering mild corrections or gentle advice. The result is a calm, deliberate flow of activity, small gestures, subtle eccentricities, and minor domestic dramas weaving together into a soft, enduring rhythm. As we reach the quiet conclusion of our Hellenistic wanderings, let's pause to reflect on the gentle rhythms, subtle eccentricities, and soft domestic dramas that have filled these courts. By now, the flickering torchlight, the ripple of fountains, and the soft shuffle of robes are familiar companions, and our evening journey through history is almost complete. The rulers we've met, Ptolemies, Seleucids, minor royals, and eccentric advisors are, in many ways, surprisingly human. Their quirks, routines, and minor mishaps remind us that history is not always about grand gestures or monumental events. Sometimes it is about a king carefully pacing his corridors, a princess arranging flowers on a balcony, or a parrot repeating a tutor's lecture with unintentional humor. These moments, small and seemingly inconsequential, are the heartbeat of palace life, quietly shaping the texture of human experience. Even the minor tragedies we encountered, illnesses, small domestic mishaps, or misaligned fountains, carry a gentle weight. They are not shocking, not gruesome, but softly human, punctuating the otherwise calm rhythm of life. A dropped goblet, a mispronounced line, or a slightly crooked robe may seem trivial, yet they add depth to our understanding of these people, reminding us that no dynasty, no matter how powerful, was immune to the ordinary imperfection of life. Romantic subtleties and social nuances continue to color the evening. Courtiers whisper, young royals exchange soft gestures, and tutors guide gently from the shadows. It's a quiet interplay of relationships, gentle enough to be soothing, yet compelling enough to keep us interested, even as the world outside the palace fades into night. These interactions, observed in candlelight, hint at the complexity of human emotion without ever becoming dramatic or disruptive. Pets, naturally, remain the soft punctuation in every scene. Dogs curling their hearts, cats patrolling corridors, and birds echoing snippets of conversation create a living, breathing tapestry that balances the structured routines of palace life. Their small movements, minor interruptions, and simple companionship highlight the domestic warmth within the grandeur of dynastic power. As we let the night stretch fully over Alexandria, Antioch, or Pella, picture the entire palace settling into a gentle rhythm. Torches burn low, fountains ripple quietly, and the soft echo of footsteps gradually fades. Royals, tutors, advisors, and servants all move within this calm, coordinated dance, each playing a minor role in the tapestry of life. The grand political ambitions and dynastic tensions remain, of course, but softened into the background of routine, habit, and quiet reflection. And finally, let us drift with the palace into complete stillness. The lamps flicker once more, shadows deepen, and a soft hush blankets the corridors. Evening lessons, minor misadventures, eccentric routines, and whispered conversations are tucked away, leaving only the faint warmth of human presence. History, in this gentle view, becomes a lullaby, the soft rhythm of life, the enduring quirks of humanity, and the subtle charm of days long past.